If I were to ask you what the worst episode of Avatar The Last Airbender was, you would probably say The Great Divide. The episode is mediocre at best and even disliked among the most hardcore of its fans, because of how unremarkable it is. Book 1 is the weakest season after all. However, I would disagree. I think that The Southern Raiders was the worst episode of the show because it's so poorly written, contrived, and inconsistent, and because it revealed the show's true intent, something that is clear to anyone who doesn't ship Zutara or has, a functioning brain. And I will prove this to you if you decide to hear me out and watch this video until the very end. And besides, you have the right to be critical of my work just as much as I am critical of other people's work. First of all, let me start by asking you this. What was Avatar The Last Airbender really about? Well, the simple answer is the show is propaganda. Excuse me, a product of its times. In my humble opinion, if you pay close attention to detail, Avatar The Last Airbender wasn't a story about friendship, elements, martial arts, and balance, as much as it was a story of noble savages, where the indigenous, backwards, and uncivilized are portrayed as more enlightened, more pure, more virtuous, more moral, and more in tune with nature than the corrupt civilizations they oppose. A story that represents discipline, organization, industrialization, and civilization as inherently oppressive and corrupt, while the spear-chucking, hot-inhabiting, body-mutilating, cannibalistic rape. Sorry, I meant to say that these, people are portrayed as virtuous, brave, enlightened, morally upright, and in tune with nature. As if that shit means anything. But wait a minute. I wonder where I've seen this type of storytelling before. Alright, Pocahontas, Dances with Wolves, The Last of the Mohicans, that Spirit Horse movie and that other Avatar movie with blue people that almost made $3 billion. When and where was this show produced again? Of course, stories of noble savages still persist, and are produced to this day, because those spear-checking, hot-inhabiting people were just so nice and cute, weren't they? Primitive and backwards people are just as violent and brutal and cruel as technologically advanced civilizations. Arguably even more so. This whole in tune with nature narrative is complete bullshit to anyone who has a basic education in science and medicine. But this aside, also wrong because it's bad writing and hurts the show's narrative, and I will prove it to you in this video. All these stories, even the animated ones, present the spear-chucking, hot-inhabiting people who live without basic sanitation as free, kind, caring, virtuous, morally upright, and in tune or harmony with nature, whatever that means. While the villains are disciplined but rule through fear and intimidation. Technologically advanced but corrupt by progress, evil colonizers who burn forests, kill animals, and don't respect nature. Civilization is corrupt and nature is inherently good, completely ignoring the fact that we build civilization and technology to escape the cruelty of nature. What I do find most interesting is that most people don't seem to understand this about Avatar. I remember I was watching AR's amazing videos on the Legend of Korra, where he explains why he hates the show, and there is one specific moment that stood out to me.
The ancient airbenders are the noble savages trope to a T, and because of their respect for nature, the spirits left them alone.
Sorry AR, did you miss the swamp water tribe who lived without shoes and clothes and wore leaves to hide their asses? What did you think they were? I love how many dirty and filthy jokes the writers make at their expense, by the way. Haha, it's so funny? Get it, because they're backward savages. What about the spear-chucking sun warriors with Native American aesthetics? In a show inspired by Asian cultures? Alright, because this shit was made by modern Americans, who look back at the natives of the continent as nothing more than a bunch of noble savages, who were just so in tune with the real nature of fire, in a show where fire doesn't even work like real fire. Or what about the air nomads, who lived in temples? How can someone be nomadic and monaistic at the same time?
No, be airy and nomadic?
Yes, ER, I agree. It's a real shame you don't feel like criticizing the original show this way. Or I don't know, how about Katara and Sokka? The two characters who are presented at the very start of the story from an isolated spear-chucking, hot-inhabiting village, yet somehow have the personality of 21st century American brats like Bart and Lisa Simpson. Did no one put two and two together when watching this show? Isn't it fucking hilarious that the kingdom and nation factions of this show were portrayed as the bad and corrupt ones, and the tribes and nomads factions are the good ones? And since I mentioned the water siblings, let's talk about how the show treats them, and why the Southern Raiders is the worst episode of the show. First of all, let's get something straight here. The Water Tribe family is supposed to act as a foe to the Fire Nation royal family. Ozai for Hakoda, Sokka for Zuko, and Katara with Azula. The two families come from opposite elements, so they are written as opposites. But the main difference is that while the Fire Nation family is oppressive, abusive, and rich royal family, the Water Tribe family are from a small, insignificant, poor village, but are noble, virtuous, and genuinely love and care for each other. Of course, symbolism doesn't equal good writing, because the Water Tribe family and their village are reduced to the noble savages trope in its most basic form, while the Fire Nation royal family faction has the most writing effort put into it. I wonder why. The Waters family's virtuous and noble values are not the result of good writing, but the lack of it. Now, let's get back to the Southern Raiders episode. This episode deals with the emotional center of the Water Tribe family, Kia's death. This death scarred this family, forced Hakoda and his men to leave, Katara to grow up fast, Sokka to feel insecure, all the good stuff. And in the episode where this emotional knot is resolved, Hakoda is written out of it, Sokka is written out of character, and Katara, we'll get to her. But let's start with Hakoda first, because there is something I want to touch on here. Isn't it just so funny how Sokka and Zuko saved Hakoda from prison, only for him to be written out of the entire story just one episode later? All that effort for nothing. I don't know about you guys, but I really would have liked to see Hakoda's reaction to learning about the location of the man who murdered his wife. Isn't it even funnier how Sokka and Katara never told him anything about that, by the way? That last scene the Water family has together where he says how proud he really is really falls flat when you turn your brain on and realize that, That last scene the Water family has together when he says how proud he is of his children really falls flat when you turn your brain on and realize that, Oh right, I forgot, he's not a real character, he is not a human being, he is just a good water noble savage dad. The story is only interested in shilling him for the sake of making the backwards uncivilized side look good when compared to the evil Fire Nation civilization. He has no agency as a character, because he isn't one. But interestingly, it's not just Hakoda. It's also the strong, independent girl bosses in Toph and Suki that are written out of this episode. Remember Toph and Suki, everyone? Where were they when Sokka and Aang were confronting Zuko and Katara? I don't know about you, but I really would have liked to hear their opinions on this matter. I wonder whose side they would have chosen. I mean, could you imagine if someone killed Toph and Suki's mothers? Guess girl bosses are allowed to roll in the mud but don't have any actual opinions on important subjects. Back to the kitchen, ladies. And what about Sokka? He's written completely out of character in this scene.
Katara, she was my mother too.
She was your mother too? You literally admitted you can't even remember her face, Sokka, because Katara matured so fast and had to take care of you.
I never told anyone this before, but honestly, I'm not sure I can remember what my mother looked like. It really seems like my whole life, Katara's been the one looking out for me. She's always been the one that's there. And now, when I try to remember my mom, Katara's is the only face I can picture.
Funny enough, this earlier moment makes Katara seem right when she tells Sokka that he didn't love their mother the way she did, even though the scene portrays her as in the wrong here. I mean, I would have loved for Katara to reveal to him how she secretly heard this conversation with Toph and watch Sokka be consumed by shame. Oh well. Something else I want to say about Sokka is that his sexism never made any sense within the context of the show. Why was he a sexist in the first place? Who raised him to be that way? Hakoda, Kia, Gran are not portrayed as sexist. Not a single character in his tribe is. Instead, it's the opposite. They are portrayed as virtuous, brave, and understanding and patient people who would shut down Sokka's sexism towards Katara the moment they heard it. So where does this sexist behavior come from? However, the same goes for Katara. Where does her bratty, hot-headed feminist temper come from? Again, other people from their faction don't have this. So who? Why? How was Katara raised like this? Even in this episode, Katara's character is a mess. She is written as completely vengeful and out of control. She gets rewarded for her shitty, unreasonable, over-emotional behavior, which is unfortunately very consistent for her character. Keep in mind, she was only shitty towards Zuko because she was projecting onto his face. This is why you'll see countless essays about Zuko and Azula's deep psychology, which is mostly just people projecting their own headcanons onto them, but you'll never see the same amount of effort into analyzing Sokka and Katara's story. Instead, people just mindlessly praise them for teaching good kid lessons like sexism bad and feminism good. Because, well, they don't have any. Because deep down, people know that their characterization is just generic bullshit that could be found in any American cartoon. It's a shame really, because Katara is the only female character in the show who is, actually female. Both Toph and Azula were originally going to be boys, which also means that Maya and Tali would have been boys too. And Suki was not supposed to make it past one episode. So that leaves us with Katara as the only original female character in the whole show, not some mutation or last minute addition. But that would mean the writers would have to write her as a product of her society and culture. And they cannot do that since her culture is reduced to a bunch of noble savages. Katara and Sokka have no culture, no identity, no tradition, no heritage, except, using spears and being so in tune with the water and the moon. Unfortunately, that didn't help Katara's character from the writer's stupidity, as they forgot to have her use the magic spirit water to save Jet's life. But then offer it to heal Zuko's face 2 episodes later? Guess she can only focus on one bad boy at a time, eh? Within the context of the story, Katara's virtuous values are not an example of good writing, but the lack of it. The girl should not have the personality and standards of a 21st century feminist brat like Lisa Simpson. She could have started the story as a backwards and bigoted character, and then grow into a more open-minded feminist role thanks to her experiences with people. But that would require turning her and representing her entire tribe as a backwards culture. And that's a big no-no. Also, female characters are incapable of growth in this show. And before you say, "Oh, but it's a kid's show, shouldn't hold you to such high standards," remember what I said earlier about the Water Tribe family acting as a symbolic foil to the Fire Nation one? The writers clearly had no problem putting tons of effort into developing the faction's history and culture, so I'm only holding them to the same standard as their symbolic foil. The Earth Kingdom is also better developed as a faction, so again, they can do better than this shit. Fun, isn't it? Despite the fact that the writers present these backwards savages as noble, virtuous, and morally upright, their factions have barely any effort put into it, while the Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom that are actual civilizations are way more developed. I know I've been rambling a lot so far, so let's get back to the Silent Raiders one last time. The conflict of this episode isn't even resolved well. Yonra turning out to be retired is stupid and a case of moral convenience. His last raid was 6 years ago, and yet the dude is aged like 20, and the moment he was revealed to be retired and miserable, we all knew they weren't gonna kill him, so the tension in this scene where Katara gives her empowering speech is completely fake. The writers manipulated the entire timeline of the show because they wanted to send a message that taking revenge makes you just as bad as your oppressors. And they are using Katara's character in a performative way to deliver that. If Yonra had not been retired, that would have been a problem, because the characters would have been justified in killing him. And again, before you say, "Oh, but it's a kid show and they couldn't have killed off Yonra," remember this shit? Yeah, they didn't have a problem killing Combustion Man in the edgiest way they could possibly think of. But killing Ozai and Yonra is a bad idea. Oh no, such a moral dilemma. We need plot contrivances and Deus Ex Machinas for this shit. Katara is such an insulting character because she's just so performative. Everything she does or says within the narrative is just performative, just like Pocahontas. Both are noble savage female characters who are motherless daughters of the village chief, with perfect skin, hair, teeth and nails of course, and are romanticized as symbols. The difference is the 10-year gap between them, which means that Katara got to have a bit of a petty temper and some power fantasy elements. The irony of this is that she ends up feeling extremely similar to Zuko. But unlike him, she never grows, never learns, never receives any form of consistent criticism for her toxic behavior, is never humbled, never works for anything, and is even rewarded for some of her toxic behavior. The worst part about her character, however, has to be the fact that everything she gains has to come at the expense of another character. It's not enough for Katara to have the laziest and most rushed training arc in the entire show, Aang has to be turned into a lazy idiot to make her look even better. It is not enough for Katara to take the role of leader from Sokka, he has to drink some cactus juice and go crazy for an entire episode. It's not enough for Katara to steal Zuko's victory over Azula, he has to be incapacitated and Appa has to be written out of the scenario, so the glory can be hers and hers alone. I guess the giant bison was nothing more than a fraud after all, was he? So much for the themes of friendship. If you ask me, the real symbolism between Katara and Azula is that when Azula didn't tell her father the truth about Aang being alive, she faced narrative consequences for that. But when Katara didn't tell her father the truth about Yonra being alive, she didn't. And as if all of this wasn't bad enough, Katara is also a huge hypocrite as she often treats her brother in very sexist ways. A simple joke like her hitting Sokka in the head in return to a marshal wouldn't fly if Katara was the boy and Sokka was the girl. And if you're going to defend this scene because it's, well, just a joke, then you're also going to have to defend the wonderful scene between Iroh and June, because, well, this is just a joke, right? So not only is Katara's character bad and performative, it's also completely hypocritical for the values that she's supposedly representing. Avatar: The Last Airbender was a product of its times. The martial arts and Eastern symbolism, you can thank the popularity of anime for that. Especially Dragon Ball and Naruto. The elemental magic thing, extremely generic for action cartoons of its time, even fucking magical girls did that. And the world building, well, let's just say it's not exactly genius to give all the water people blue clothes and the fire people the red ones, while reducing every single faction except 2 of them into a bunch of noble savages. As far as I am concerned, the story is just as shallow as the 2009 Avatar movie with blue people. Yes, it is better written than that movie, but not deep. And most of it comes out of people using their own headcanon or projecting things onto the story. But unfortunately, we live in an era where the 2000s media is making a comeback in terms of reboots, remakes and sequels because of nostalgia. In conclusion, the reason why I call the Southern Raiders the worst episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender is because it revealed the show's true colors. This is the episode where we see the show's narrative collapse under its own weight. All for the sake of delivering a fake message that the liberal elites of Hollywood in the 2000s were comfortable with, but didn't really give a shit about. Stories of noble savages are wrong and insulting to the history of humanity and civilizations. More importantly, it's also hypocritical and it's racist and disrespectful towards the very indigenous cultures it shields for the sake of its oppressed versus oppressor narrative. And as if that isn't bad enough, it's all just performative anyway. And if you disagree with any of what I just said in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below with your criticism and then go live in a swamp full of insects, snakes and disease that you didn't even know exist. Or better yet, some of the uncontacted isolated tribes in South America or North Sentinel Island and see how that goes. Cheers!